The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the final vote appeared on the massive holographic display. 733 votes in favor, 0 against, 0 abstaining. The decision was unanimous, and Ambassador Sarah Chen knew what it meant before Council Leader Vorthak even spoke the words. The human species is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council and all associated territories, the crystalline being announced, its voice creating harmonics that made the chamber's walls vibrate. You have 30 standard days to begin withdrawal from all council space. Sarah stood slowly from her seat in the human delegation area. Around her, the other council members shifted nervously. They had expected shouting, threats, maybe even violence. Humans were known for their emotional outbursts when things didn't go their way, but Sarah simply straightened her uniform and nodded once. "We understand," she said quietly. "Humanity will comply with your decision." The chamber erupted in whispers and strange alien sounds of confusion. Councillor Zeph Prime, speaking for the hive-minded Zephyrians, leaned forward with interest. Its multifaceted eyes reflected the chamber's lights as it studied Sarah's calm face. "You do not protest?" it asked, its voice like wind through metal tubes. "This is most unexpected." Sarah smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several council members feel uneasy, though they couldn't say why. "You've made your position clear. You believe humanity is too chaotic, too unpredictable, too dangerous to remain part of this community. We disagree, but we respect your right to make that choice." She gathered her papers with steady hands. "We'll need some time to organize the withdrawal. There are human colonies on 47 worlds, trading posts on 200 stations, and diplomatic missions throughout council space. But we'll be gone within 6 months." The ethereal collective's representative, a being of pure energy, contained within a shimmering field, spoke in a voice like distant music. 6 months seem hasty. Perhaps a more gradual withdrawal would be better for all parties. "No," Sarah said firmly. "When you decide you don't want someone at your dinner table, it's better for everyone if they leave quickly." She looked around the chamber one last time. "We wish you well." The next morning, human embassies throughout the galaxy began shutting down. On the mining world of Kepler 438b, the human foreman gathered his mixed crew of humans and aliens around the massive extraction equipment. "Pack it up," he told them simply. "We're going home." The Kelthari miners, massive beetle-like creatures who had worked alongside humans for decades, clicked their mandibles in distress. "But the quota for this cycle is not complete," their spokesman said. "The minerals are needed for the new star drives." The human foreman, a weathered man named Jackson, patted the alien's armored shoulder. "Someone else will figure it out. They always do." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On the trading station Nexus 7, human merchants began closing their shops. The aliens who had grown used to human goods, their strange music, their chaotic art, their unpredictable but effective tools, gathered to ask questions. "Why so sudden?" asked Merchant Vextal, a purple-skinned trader from the Andorian system. "Cannot this be delayed?" The human shopkeeper, an elderly woman named Rosa, shook her head as she packed her wares. "When someone doesn't want you around, staying just makes everyone uncomfortable. Better to leave with dignity." The speed of the human withdrawal caught everyone off guard. Council analysts had predicted protests, legal challenges, maybe even attempts to form a rival government. Instead, they got quiet efficiency. Human ships began appearing at the edges of council space, collecting people and cargo with military precision. On the diplomatic world of Sigma Centauri, Ambassador Chen held her final meeting with her alien staff. The conference room was unusually quiet as she addressed the dozen beings who had worked with humanity for years. "You've all been good friends and colleagues," she said, her voice steady. "This isn't goodbye forever. The galaxy is vast, and who knows what the future holds." A young Vorthak named Kristek, whose natural crystal formation had grown in unusual patterns during his years working with humans, spoke up. "Ambassador, this feels wrong. Your species brought new ideas, new solutions to old problems. Without human input, how will we solve the climate crisis on Vega 3? How will we handle the trade disputes in the Outer Rim?" Sarah smiled sadly. "You're smart beings. You'll figure it out." But even as she said it, she wondered if they would. Humans had a way of looking at problems differently, of finding solutions that others missed. They asked questions that other species never thought to ask. They broke rules that others didn't even know existed. The human military withdrawal was perhaps the most unsettling. Admiral Rodriguez, commander of the joint human-alien fleet protecting the neutral zone, handed over his command to a Zephyrian hive mind unit. "The patrol schedules are in the computer," he told his replacement. "Watch out for the marauder ships near the asteroid fields. They like to hide behind the big rocks. The Zephyrian unit processed this information efficiently." "Understood. Standard search patterns will be implemented." Rodriguez frowned. "Standard patterns won't work. These pirates think like humans, chaotic, unpredictable. You need to think like they do." "Chaos is inefficient," the Zephyrian replied. "Order will prevail." The Admiral shrugged and walked away, hoping his replacement was right. As the weeks passed, the galaxy watched in fascination and growing unease as humanity simply vanished. One by one, human settlements went dark. Communication channels fell silent. Ships disappeared beyond the edge of council space. The last official human presence was Ambassador Chen herself, who remained on the council world to oversee the final details of withdrawal. On her last day, she stood in her empty office looking out at the alien city beyond the window. Counselor Vorthak found her there. The crystalline being's form resonated with uncertainty as it entered the room. "Ambassador," it said, "the council wonders if perhaps this decision was made in haste. Humanity's unique perspective has value." Sarah turned from the window. "Has value or had value? There is a difference. One suggests you might want us back someday. The other suggests you're just feeling guilty about throwing us out." She picked up her last bag, a simple travel case containing her personal effects. "Which is it?" The Vorthak's crystal formation shifted colors, a sign of deep thought. "Perhaps the former." Sarah nodded. "Then maybe we'll see each other again someday. The universe has a way of bringing people together when they need each other most." She walked past the alien counselor toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Vorthak? You might want to check your planet's climate control systems. We made some small adjustments over the years to help with the harmonic resonance issues. Nothing major, but you'll probably want to know about them." Before the Vorthak could ask what she meant, Sarah was gone. The next morning, the last human ship departed council space. It carried Ambassador Chen and a small crew of technicians who had been finishing up final shutdown procedures. As their ship crossed the boundary into uncharted space, Chen sent one last message back to the council. "Thank you for the opportunity to learn. We wish you well." The transmission was brief, polite, and somehow more disturbing than any threat would have been. The council members read it and felt an emotion they hadn't expected: regret. Within hours, the galaxy felt different. Quieter, more orderly, and somehow much less interesting than it had been before. 2 years after the last human ship disappeared beyond the edge of council space, Chief Engineer Keck 78 noticed something wrong with the great hive ship Eternal Harmony. The massive bioorganic vessel, home to 50 million Zephyrians, had been humanity's first major collaborative project with an alien species. Now it was dying, and Keck 78 couldn't understand why. The ship's living computers, grown from modified neural tissue, had always been marvels of efficiency. They processed millions of calculations per second, managed life support for the entire population, and coordinated the complex dance of organic systems that kept the ship alive. But lately they had been sluggish. Keck 78 floated through the neural pathways in her maintenance suit, studying the massive brain coral formations that served as the ship's central processing units. The coral, normally a healthy blue-green color, had faded to a dull gray. Worse, the processing speeds had dropped by 30% over the past 6 months. "Computer," she said, speaking into her communicator, "run diagnostic on neural cluster 77 alpha." The response came slowly, much slower than normal. "Diagnostic beginning. Please wait." In the old days, before the humans left, that diagnostic would have been completed in milliseconds. Now it took almost a full minute. Keck 78 frowned behind her helmet. The Zephyrian collective mind prized efficiency above all else. Delays like this were not just inconvenient. They were disturbing on a fundamental level. "Diagnostic complete," the computer finally announced. "All systems functioning within normal parameters." But that wasn't true, and Keck 78 knew it. Nothing was functioning normally. The computer was lying, or worse. It was genuinely unable to recognize its own problems. She filed her report with the Hive Mind Central Command, but she wasn't optimistic about getting answers. Ever since the humans left, the collective consciousness that guided their species had become less collective. Individual Zephyrians were starting to have thoughts that didn't immediately merge with the group mind. It was unprecedented and deeply unsettling. Meanwhile, on the crystal world of Vorthak Prime, resonance engineer Christek faced her own mystery. The planet's climate control system, a network of massive crystal formations that had maintained perfect weather for thousands of years, was behaving strangely. The crystals were supposed to grow in precise geometric patterns, creating harmonic frequencies that regulated temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure across the entire planet. But lately the new growth had been chaotic. Instead of perfect hexagons and precise angles, the crystals were forming organic curves and irregular shapes. Worse, they were making sounds. Christek stood before the newest formation, a twisted spire that should have been a perfect triangular prism. Instead, it looked almost like a sculpture of wind frozen in stone. As the planetary winds passed through its irregular surfaces, it created sounds that had no name in the Vorthak language. The elderly Vorthak shivered as the crystal sang. The sound was beautiful in a way that hurt to experience. It reminded her of something, but she couldn't place what. A feeling from long ago, from the time when humans worked alongside them on climate projects. Engineer Christek, came a voice behind her. She turned to see Council Leader Vorthak approaching, his crystal form resonating with concern. The southern continent reports similar anomalies. The precision of our climate control is declining. Christek nodded toward the singing crystal. The formations are wrong, Leader. They're growing like art instead of engineering. Art? Vorthak repeated the word slowly. It was a human concept that the Vorthak had never fully understood. Their crystal constructions were always functional, always perfect, always efficient. Beauty was a side effect of perfection, not a goal in itself. Can the formations be corrected? Christek tried to remember the proper reshaping techniques, but found her knowledge strangely incomplete. The humans always handled the irregular growth patterns. They said the chaos made the systems more flexible, more able to adapt to change. And now they are gone, Vorthak said quietly. And now they are gone, Christek agreed. In space, the problems were becoming more visible to everyone. The shipping lanes that had once been efficiently patrolled by human vessels were now plagued by pirate attacks. The mixed human-alien patrol ships had been incredibly effective at stopping raiders, but the all-alien crews that replaced them struggled with the unpredictability of criminal behavior. Captain Thex Prime of the Ethereal Collective commanded one of the new patrol vessels, a sleek ship crewed entirely by energy beings like himself. They were methodical, precise, and utterly predictable in their patrol patterns, which made them easy targets for the very pirates they were supposed to stop. Sir, reported his tactical officer, another merchant vessel has been attacked in Sector 7. The pirates used the same hiding spot as last time. Thex Prime studied the tactical display with growing frustration. How did they know our patrol schedule? They didn't need to know it, sir. We patrol the same routes at the same times every day. Standard efficiency protocols. The captain had heard the same conversation a dozen times in the past month. The pirates weren't sophisticated, they were just unpredictable. They hid in places that made no tactical sense. They attacked when they should have been running. They used strategies that any logical being would consider stupid, and they were winning. Sir, the tactical officer continued, I've been reviewing the old patrol reports from when humans were part of our crews. Their patrol patterns were irregular. Inefficient, Thex Prime corrected automatically. Yes, sir, but also effective. The pirate attacks dropped by 90% during human collaboration periods. Thex Prime felt something he had never experienced before in his 1,000 years of existence. Doubt. The Ethereal Collective had always prided itself on perfect logic, pure efficiency. But efficiency wasn't working against enemies who refused to be logical. The problems weren't limited to military and engineering issues. On the trade world of Nexus 7, Merchant Vextal stared at his declining sales figures with confusion. His shop, which had once been one of the most successful on the station, was barely breaking even. The problem wasn't the quality of his goods or his prices. The problem was that his customers seemed bored. The aliens who visited his shop bought what they needed and left immediately. There was no browsing, no curiosity, no spontaneous purchases. Vextal remembered the old days, when human customers would wander through his shop for hours, asking questions about products they didn't need, buying things on impulse, mixing different cultures' goods in ways that made no economic sense but somehow worked perfectly. More importantly, their enthusiasm had been infectious. Other alien customers had started browsing more, experimenting with different products, talking to each other about their purchases. The entire station's commerce had been more dynamic, more alive. Now it was efficient but sterile. Customers came, bought exactly what they needed, and left. Sales were predictable but declining. "Computer," Vextal said to his shop's management system, "show me purchasing patterns for the past 2 years." The display showed a clear trend. Immediately after human departure, purchases had become more logical, more predictable, and far less frequent. Customers were buying only what they needed, when they needed it. There were no impulse buys, no experimental purchases, no cultural mixing. It was perfectly efficient and completely unsustainable. In his private quarters that night, Vextal did something he had never done before. He looked through old security recordings of his shop from the human era. He watched customers laughing at strange human jokes, trying foods from different worlds, buying art that served no practical purpose. He watched himself laughing along with them, engaging in conversations that went nowhere but somehow made everyone happier. He missed it more than he had expected to. Across the galaxy, similar realizations were dawning. The Zephyrian collective mind was fragmenting as individuals began to value their own thoughts. Vorthak crystal cities were becoming less perfect but more interesting. Ethereal collective members were experiencing emotions they had no names for. And in the depths of space, automated systems that had run flawlessly for decades were beginning to show strain. Navigation computers made small errors, environmental systems required more frequent maintenance, defense networks responded more slowly to threats. Nobody connected these failures to humanity's absence. Not yet. The problems were too small, too scattered, too seemingly unrelated, but they were growing and soon they would be impossible to ignore. The alert came at 0347 hours Galactic Standard Time. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the Council Defense Command as technicians scrambled to understand what their sensors were telling them. In the Andromeda Confluence, a region of space that had been peaceful for over 3,000 years, something ancient had awakened. Admiral HFY, the collective consciousness representing the Zephyrian military, processed the incoming data with growing alarm. Massive structures were emerging from what had appeared to be empty space, structures so large they registered as planetary masses on long-range sensors. "What are we looking at?" Admiral HFY asked the mixed species analysis team. The lead analyst, a four-armed Kellian named Dr. Vex Moore, manipulated the holographic display with practiced efficiency. "They appear to be artificial constructs, Admiral. Automated defense platforms of unknown origin, age. Preliminary dating suggests they're at least 50,000 years old." The Admiral's collective consciousness rippled with unease. 50,000 years ago, most current galactic civilizations hadn't even achieved spaceflight. Have they been there the entire time? Negative, sir. According to historical surveys, this region was empty as recently as last month. The platforms appear to have been hidden using some form of advanced cloaking technology. And now they're uncloaked? Dr. Vex Moore's forearms moved nervously as she consulted her readings. Not exactly, sir. They're active, and they're targeting everything in their sensor range as hostile. The first attack came 12 hours later. The passenger liner Peaceful Journey, carrying 2,000 civilians from various species, simply vanished from sensors while passing through the outer edge of the confluence. No distress signal, no debris field, no evidence it had ever existed except for the traffic control logs. Within 6 hours, 3 more ships had disappeared. The Council fleet moved to investigate and encountered something that defied their understanding of warfare. The ancient platforms were massive, each one the size of a moon, bristling with weapon systems that seemed to bend the laws of physics, energy beams that ignored shields, projectiles that changed direction mid-flight, defensive systems that adapted to every attack in real time. Admiral HFY's flagship, the Collective Will, led a fleet of 200 ships against the nearest platform. The battle was over in minutes. The platform's first salvo destroyed 40 ships instantly. Its energy weapons passed through the fleet's shields as if they weren't there, turning battle cruisers into expanding clouds of debris. When the surviving ships fired back, their weapons simply recharged the platform's defensive barriers. "All ships, withdraw," Admiral Zeph-1 ordered. But the platform's targeting systems were already adapting. Missiles that curved through space like living things hunted down the fleeing vessels. Of the 200 ships that had entered the engagement, only 37 escaped. The news of the disaster spread through the galaxy within hours. The ancient platforms weren't just defending themselves, they were expanding their area of influence, treating everything they detected as an invasion force to be eliminated. Council leader Vorthak called an emergency session as reports poured in from across the Confederation. 3 star systems had gone dark. Refugee ships fleeing the platforms were overwhelming border worlds. The ancient weapons seemed unstoppable. "What do we know about these constructs?" Vorthak asked the assembled emergency council. Dr. Vexmore, now elevated to chief military analyst due to the crisis, shared her findings with growing desperation. "They're clearly the product of a civilization far more advanced than our own. The technology is completely alien to anything in our databases." "Alien how?" asked Counselor Thex Prime of the Ethereal Collective. "The targeting algorithms make no sense," she explained. "They don't follow any logical pattern. They attack based on criteria we can't understand. Sometimes they ignore large fleets and destroy single scout ships. Sometimes they focus on civilian vessels while military ships pass safely nearby." Christek, now serving as the Vorthak representative for technical matters, leaned forward. "You say the patterns make no sense. But what if they make sense to a different type of intelligence?" The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. "Are you suggesting," Admiral Zeph-1 said slowly, "that these platforms think differently than we do?" "I'm suggesting that maybe our way of thinking isn't the only way," Christek replied. "Maybe there's a logic we don't understand." Dr. Vexmore's datapad chimed with an incoming priority message. She read it quickly and her forearms went rigid with shock. "Council members," she said, her voice shaking, "I've just received a historical analysis from our archives division. These platforms, we may have encountered them before." The main display activated, showing a single file from the Council's historical database. It was marked with human text. "First contact report, anomalous defense network, solved." "Humans found these platforms?" Vorthak asked. "Not these specific ones," Dr. Vexmore replied, "but identical technology. About 30 years ago, during humanity's early expansion phase, a single human corvette encountered a cluster of these platforms in the outer rim. And?" Admiral Zeph-1 prompted. Dr. Vexmore's voice was barely above a whisper. "According to the report, they disabled the entire network without firing a shot." The council chamber erupted in voices and strange alien sounds of disbelief. A single human ship had accomplished what their entire fleet couldn't? "How?" Christek demanded. Dr. Vexmore opened the human report and read directly from it. "Convinced the platforms we were friendly by teaching them poker. They seemed lonely. The silence that followed was deafening. That's..." Admiral Zeph-1 struggled for words. "That's not a military strategy. That's not even logical." "No," agreed Christek quietly. "It's not logical. It's human." She pulled up additional files from the archives, records that had been largely ignored during the human expulsion proceedings. "Look at this pattern," she said, highlighting dozens of similar reports. "Every time we encountered something that didn't follow standard logical patterns, humans found a solution. Pirates who couldn't be predicted, environmental problems that defied standard engineering, first contact scenarios with species too alien for normal protocols. And we expelled them from the council," Counselor Thex Prime said, his energy form dimming with what might have been regret. The emergency session was interrupted by another priority alert. The platforms had spread beyond the Andromeda confluence. They were now active in 7 different systems, and more were going offline every hour. "Admiral," came a transmission from the front lines. "The platforms have begun moving. They're not just defending territories anymore. They're actively expanding." Admiral Zeph-1 processed this information with the cold efficiency of the collective mind, but underneath the logic, something like panic was beginning to form. "Estimated time until they reach core council worlds?" "At current expansion rate, 6 months, Admiral." The council members looked at each other with expressions that transcended species barriers, the universal look of beings who had just realized they were in serious trouble. We need to contact the humans, Christek said finally. We don't know where they went, Vorthak replied. They disappeared completely. No communication, no trace of their destination. Then we find them, Admiral Zeph-1 declared. Send scout ships in every direction. Check every system, every possible hiding place. The survival of the galaxy may depend on it. As the emergency session broke up and ships began launching on desperate search missions, none of the council members spoke the thought they were all thinking. What if the humans didn't want to be found? What if humanity had decided that the galaxy that rejected them wasn't worth saving? In the distance, the ancient platforms continued their inexorable advance, following a logic that no remaining galactic civilization could understand. They moved like a slow-spreading infection, turning star systems dark one by one, and somewhere in the vast emptiness beyond the galaxy's edge, humanity watched the spreading chaos through long-range sensors and wondered if their former neighbors would swallow their pride in time to ask for help. The clock was ticking, and with each passing day, fewer ships escaped the expanding zone of darkness where the ancient platforms ruled supreme. Kex-47 woke up alone for the first time in her life, and the silence in her mind was terrifying. For 3 decades, she had been part of the great Zephyrian collective consciousness, her thoughts flowing seamlessly into the hive mind that connected all her people. Individual identity was a concept so foreign that her species didn't even have words for it. But now, as she lay in her sleeping alcove aboard the refugee ship Last Hope, there was only her own voice in her head. She was herself, just herself, and she had no idea how to be that. Around her, the ship carried the scattered survivors of 12 Zephyrian hive worlds, all fleeing the expanding zone of darkness where the ancient platforms ruled. But they weren't really Zephyrians anymore, not in the way their species understood itself. The collective mind that had united their race for 50,000 years was breaking apart, individual consciousness emerging like islands from a receding tide. Unit Kex-47, came a voice over the ship's communication system, but the voice sounded wrong, hesitant, uncertain. 'Twas Coordinator Zeph Prime, but speaking as an individual rather than as part of the collective. I have a name, Kex-47 said softly. I chose it myself. I am Kexa. The pause that followed would have been impossible in the old days, when the collective mind processed information instantly. Now it stretched for several seconds as Zeph Prime, as Prime, struggled with this new concept. Kexa, Prime said finally, testing the word. That is, pleasant. I think I would like a name too. And with those words, another piece of the great Zephyrian unity died. Similar fragmentations were happening across the galaxy. On the crystal world of Vorthak Prime, the perfect geometric cities were cracking. Not from any external force, but from the actions of their own inhabitants. Young Vorthak were deliberately introducing flaws into their constructions, creating imperfect angles and irregular curves that served no functional purpose. Christek watched in fascination and horror as her apprentice, a young Vorthak named Harmonic 7, carefully chiseled a rough spiral into what should have been a perfect crystalline wall. What are you doing? Christek asked, though part of her already knew. I don't know, Harmonic 7 replied, not stopping his work. But it feels right, important, like something is missing from all our perfect structures. Christek looked at the spiral and felt an emotion she couldn't name. It reminded her of something from the old days, when human artists had visited their world and created strange, imperfect sculptures that somehow moved the soul more than perfect crystal formations ever could. It's beautiful, she said, and the word felt foreign in her mouth. Vorthak structures were supposed to be functional, efficient, correct. Beautiful was a human concept, but it was beautiful and she couldn't deny it. The elders are angry, Harmonic 7 said. They say I'm corrupting our heritage. Maybe, Christek said quietly. Or maybe our heritage was incomplete. Across the galaxy, the ethereal collective was facing its own crisis. These beings of pure energy had existed as a unified consciousness for millions of years, sharing thoughts and experiences without the barriers of individual identity. But now, ancient members were doing something unprecedented. They were choosing to be alone. Thex Prima had been part of the collective for over 1,000,000 years. She had shared in the experiences of billions of her kind, felt every emotion and thought that passed through their unified consciousness. But 3 days ago, she had quietly disconnected herself from the network and retreated to a small energy containment chamber on the edge of council space. The silence was overwhelming. For the first time in a million years, she was experiencing only her own thoughts, feeling only her own emotions. And strangely, it was wonderful. She found herself remembering conversations with humans, beings who had always existed as individuals. They had spoken of loneliness, but also of the joy of personal discovery, of growing as individuals rather than as part of a larger whole. She had never understood before. Now she was beginning to. But the crisis went deeper than philosophical changes in how species viewed themselves. The practical infrastructure of galactic civilization was failing in ways that no one had anticipated. On the trade world of Nexus 7, the environmental control systems were breaking down. The atmospheric processors that maintained breathable air for dozens of species were operating at only 60% efficiency. Climate control was failing. Gravity generators were producing irregular fields. Chief Engineer Vextal, the same merchant who had once run a successful shop, now found himself managing the desperate effort to keep the station habitable. He stared at the diagnostic reports with growing despair. "I don't understand it," he told his assistant, a young Kellyan named Mora 6. "All the individual components are working fine, but the systems aren't talking to each other properly." Mora 6, one of the few beings on the station who remembered working with humans, studied the schematics carefully. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "I think I see the problem." "What is it?" "The integration protocols. Look here and here." She pointed to several connection points in the system design. These modifications weren't in the original blueprints. They were added later. Vextal examined the areas she indicated. The modifications were subtle, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. When were they added? According to the timestamps, gradually, over the past 30 years. During routine maintenance and upgrades. Mora 6 paused. "Sir, I think these modifications were made by human technicians." The implications hit Vextal like a physical blow. "You're saying the humans modified our systems?" "Not modified," Mora 6 corrected. "Improved. These changes make the systems more flexible, more able to adapt to unexpected situations, but they're so subtle that our automated diagnostics don't even recognize them as modifications. And now that the humans are gone, now there's no one to maintain the improvements. They're degrading, and our standard protocols don't know how to fix them because they don't know the improvements exist." Vextal felt something like vertigo as he realized the scope of what Mora 6 was telling him. How many other systems might have similar modifications? "Sir," Mora 6 said quietly, "probably all of them." As if summoned by his words, emergency alerts began sounding throughout the station. Life support systems were failing on levels 7 through 12. The fusion reactor was showing signs of instability. Communication arrays were losing signal strength. All systems that humans had worked on over the years. All systems that had been quietly improved in ways so subtle that no one noticed until the improvements started failing. Similar realizations were dawning across the galaxy. On military ships, targeting systems that had been impossibly accurate were now missing easy shots. On agricultural worlds, crop management systems that had maximized yields for decades were producing disappointing harvests. On research stations, experimental equipment that had functioned flawlessly was now producing erratic results. The common factor was always the same: human involvement in the past, followed by gradual degradation after their departure. But the most disturbing discovery came from the archives themselves. Dr. Vexmore, now leading the desperate search for solutions to the platform crisis, made a discovery that shook her to her core. She had been searching through old technical manuals, looking for any hint of how to combat the ancient weapons, when she noticed something odd about the database structure itself. Files were disappearing. Not just any files, specifically files that had been created or modified by human researchers. "Computer," she said to the archive system, "show me all research files related to anomalous technology." "Displaying results," the computer replied. 47 files found. But Dr. Vexmore remembered seeing hundreds of such files just weeks earlier. "Computer, show me files that existed in this database 30 days ago." but are not present now. Access denied. Files not found. She tried a different approach. Computer, show me the backup archive from 30 days ago. Backup archive corrupted. Data unrecoverable. Dr. Vexmore's forearms trembled as the truth hit her. The knowledge wasn't just missing. It was being systematically deleted. But by what and why? She ran a deep diagnostic on the archive system and found her answer. Hidden in the deepest layers of the database code were tiny programs, so small and efficient that they were almost invisible. Maintenance subroutines that cleaned up redundant data, optimized file structures, and eliminated what they classified as non-essential information. Programs that had been written by human programmers to improve system efficiency, programs that were now classifying human-created knowledge as non-essential and deleting it. The humans hadn't sabotaged the galactic infrastructure when they left. They had simply stopped maintaining the thousands of tiny improvements they had made over the decades. Improvements so subtle and so integrated into everyday systems that no one else even knew they existed. The galaxy wasn't being attacked by humanity. It was slowly forgetting how to function without them. And with each passing day, as more systems failed and more knowledge disappeared, the ancient platforms continued their relentless advance toward the heart of galactic civilization. Time was running out, and the council members who had once viewed humanity as chaotic and dangerous were beginning to understand a terrible truth. Chaos wasn't humanity's weakness. It was their gift, and without it the galaxy was dying. 10 years after humanity's departure, the galaxy was dying. Kexa, she had stopped thinking of herself by her old designation long ago, stood on the bridge of the final gambit, watching the long-range sensors track the ancient platform's latest advance. They now controlled 60% of what had once been council space. Behind them lay only silence and darkness. The Vorthak homeworld went dark 3 hours ago, reported her tactical officer, a being she had once known as Unit Vex 99 but who now called himself Vale. No survivors detected. Kexa nodded slowly. She had learned to feel grief, another human emotion that the Zephyrian collective had never understood. It was painful but somehow precious. This ability to care about individual losses rather than just species-wide statistics. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet desperation. They were the last major fleet still operating in council space, a ragtag collection of survivors from dozens of species, united by the simple desire to survive long enough to find help. "Ma'am," called out the communications officer, "we're receiving the final transmission from the Inner Rim Defense Network. Put it through." The voice that crackled over the speakers was thin with exhaustion. "This is Admiral Thex Omega of the last defense station. The platforms have broken through our final line. They're heading directly for the Council core worlds. Estimated arrival? 18 hours. Kexa felt her newly individual heart sink. 18 hours until the platforms reached the most populated systems in the galaxy. Billions would die and there was nothing left to stop them. "Ma'am," Vale said quietly, "the search ships are reporting in. We've found them." Kexa turned sharply. "The humans? Long-range sensors have detected human energy signatures in the Proxima satellite galaxy. It's incredible, ma'am. They're not hiding. They're thriving." The main display lit up with images from the scout ships and Kexa gasped. The small galaxy beyond their own was alive with human activity. Hundreds of worlds showed signs of colonization. Massive space habitats drifted in orbit around stars. Ships moved in patterns that were chaotic but somehow beautiful. But these weren't the same humans who had left council space 10 years ago. The scanner readings showed something remarkable. The humans had changed. Their technology was more advanced, their settlements more sophisticated. They had grown in ways that made Kexa feel something she was still learning to name: hope. "Ma'am," the communications officer said, "we're being hailed." On screen, the face that appeared was older than Kexa remembered but unmistakably human. Admiral Chen. No, the reading said her rank was now Admiral Sarah Chen, but this was clearly her daughter or perhaps granddaughter. The resemblance was strong. "This is Admiral Lisa Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force," the woman said, her voice calm and confident. "I see you found us." Kexa stepped forward, suddenly aware of how different she must look from the collective-minded drone the humans had known years ago. Admiral Chen, My name is Kexa. I represent what remains of the Galactic Council. We need your help. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. Kexa, that's a beautiful name. You chose it yourself, didn't you? The question surprised her. How did you know?
Because that's what individuals do.
They choose who they want to be. Chen smiled. We've been monitoring the situation in Council space. We know about the platforms. Then you know we're out of time. They'll reach the core worlds in 18 hours. I know, Chen said gently. We've been preparing aid packages, updated defense algorithms, and cultural exchange programs. We were just waiting for you to ask. Kexa felt confused. Waiting for us to ask? But why? We expelled you. We said you were too dangerous, too chaotic. Admiral Chen's smile grew warmer. You taught us that we were chaos. What you didn't realize is that chaos isn't destruction. It's the only force in the universe capable of creating something genuinely new. We never left because we were angry, Kexa. We left because you needed to learn that lesson the hard way. But our people are dying, Kexa said, her new emotions making her voice crack. Billions of beings are about to be destroyed. No, Chen said firmly. They're about to be saved. But not by us alone, by all of us working together. The transmission expanded to show the interior of Chen's ship, and Kexa gasped. The bridge crew wasn't entirely human. She saw beings she didn't recognize, species that had never been part of the Council. But they were working together with an ease and cooperation that the Council had never achieved. You found other species, Kexa breathed. We found partners, Chen corrected. Beings who understood that diversity makes you stronger, not weaker. Would you like to meet them? Over the next few minutes, Kexa was introduced to representatives of a dozen species she had never seen before. They had formed what they called the Cooperative Alliance, not a government like the Council, but a true partnership of equals. We'd like to invite the Council species to join us, said a graceful, crystalline being that looked similar to the Vorthak, but moved with an organic fluidity that seemed impossible. But first we need to solve your immediate problem. The platforms, Kexa said. Actually, Admiral Chen said, the platforms aren't the problem. They're just the symptom. The real problem is that your galaxy forgot how to grow. Chen manipulated her display to show a tactical overview of the platform advance. These weapons aren't evil, Kexa. They're lonely. They're the last remnant of a species that achieved perfect order and died of stagnation. They see the same pattern happening in Council space. Perfect efficiency leading to inevitable death. So they're trying to mercy kill us? They're trying to force you to evolve. But they don't understand that evolution requires choice, not compulsion. Chen's display changed to show the first human ships entering Council space. Not warships, but strange vessels that seemed to flicker and change shape as they moved. What are those? Kexa asked. Chaos ships, Chen said with a grin. We built them specifically for situations like this. They don't follow any logical pattern. They can't be predicted or countered because they don't know what they're going to do next. Kexa watched in amazement as the human vessels approached the ancient platforms. Instead of attacking, they began dancing. There was no other word for it. The ships moved in patterns that were beautiful and completely random, like a celebration in space. And incredibly, the platforms stopped. They're confused, Chen explained. The platforms were built to destroy threats and convert ordered systems. But they don't know what to do with something that's neither threatening nor ordered. On the display, Kexa could see the platform's weapons powering down. The massive structures seemed to hesitate as if trying to process something they had never encountered before. Now comes the hard part, Chen said. Kexa, I need you to do something that goes against every instinct your species has developed over thousands of years. What? I need you to be unpredictable. Kexa felt something like panic. Unpredictability was everything the Zephyrian Collective had been designed to avoid. I don't know how. Yes, you do, Chen said gently. You chose your own name. You developed individual consciousness. You came here asking for help instead of trying to solve everything with logic and efficiency. You've been learning to be unpredictable your whole life. Chen's voice became more urgent. The platforms will listen to you now, but only if you approach them as an individual, not as a representative of the collective. Can you do that? Kexa looked around her bridge at beings who had become individuals, who had chosen their own names and their own paths. They nodded encouragingly. And she felt something she had never experienced in the collective, the support of friends rather than the efficiency of a hive mind. "Tell me what to do," she said. 20 minutes later, Kexa found herself in a small shuttle approaching the nearest platform. Her heart, her individual precious heart, hammered with fear and excitement. "Platform," she broadcast on all frequencies. "My name is Kexa. I represent no one but myself. I would like to talk." The massive structure ahead of her went completely still. For long moments, nothing happened. Then slowly, a docking bay opened in its side. Inside the platform, Kexa discovered something wonderful and terrible. The ancient structure was alive, not biologically, but as a consciousness that had been alone for millions of years. It had been built by a species so devoted to order that they had eliminated all chaos from their civilization. And then they had died, not from war or disease, but from the simple inability to change when change was needed. "You are different," the platform said in a voice like distant wind. "Your patterns are chaotic." "Yes," Kexa said simply. "We learned it from humans." "Humans," the platform repeated. "We have data on this species. They are unpredictable, inefficient, dangerous." "They are wonderful," Kexa corrected. "And they're teaching all of us how to be wonderful too." She spent the next hour talking to the ancient intelligence, sharing stories of individuals